Hello everybody and welcome to this week's bonus podcast where we are going to be talking all about the Rovers' return. And by we, of course, I mean me, Michael.
Me, Gemma.
And so we thought that it was... this is going to be one of these episodes that I hope people will really enjoy if you like kind of just knowing about how the show works, how it's changed over the years, and just want to delve into the history. Because we did an episode a couple of years ago about how the general outdoors set of the street has changed over the years, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I thought that was going to actually be a little bit dull, but it turns out that it was a lot of fun and other people liked it as well. So we thought we'd just do the same again, but just for the Rovers' return. What with it being the most iconic place in Coronation Street and everything.
Not just iconic, but also extremely changeable and malleable over the years. It's it's like the pub of requirement.
It basically is, isn't it? Yeah, whatever you want, it can go in there. I think, when it was put together, when Tony Warren had the idea for this, because the Rovers was part of his original pitch for Coronation Street, he thought, well, you want to have the characters, have them somewhere to congregate at the end of the episode. It's going to have a main bar, it's going to have some little side rooms, it's going to have a bag. Doesn't really matter about where it fits in, because, especially if you think about the end of it, the beginning of it, opposite, there was only meant to be 12, 13 odd episodes or so it didn't really matter.
You didn't need to sit down and world build what the layout of the pub was going to
No,
be.
they had the layout of their street, didn't they? Which was based on Archie Street in Salford, as we've talked about before. Although it's actually Archie Street didn't even have a pub in, but they thought it seems like a good idea, and good job they did, really, didn't they? If it had just been a load of houses and it had been blocked off, then
it
could really reduce storyline possibilities.
It's part of everyday life to, go to the pub and meet up with your friends and
your fellow workers
and your neighbours.
Not that we do it
well,
ever.
It was
definitely a thing for lots of people.
And if you think that the Rovers being static is a modern thing, no, there are still changes that happen right up to recently where things are included in the Rovers that couldn't actually really fit in the space.
Yeah.
And then get retconned away again.
So we thought that as part of this, it'd be quite funny to see just how it has stretched and shrunk over the years. And there is going to be a version of this on YouTube. In fact, I'm hoping that it's going to be out the same day as the audio version of this. And I've been compiling over the last month or so. I've just been grabbing photos from all over the place. So everything that we talk about today, we've got pictures of as well. So if you want to see it along with us, then you can watch it on our YouTube video as well. Little bit of interesting trivia for the beginning of this. Now, lots of people might already know that there is already a Rovers return. If you go to Manchester, it's not too far away from the set, is there? There's a Rovers that you can go to, but that's only been around
That's in Chapel Street.
Yeah, that's the one in Chapel Street, exactly. And it has not even been called the Rovers return for all its life. It's a couple of hundred years old. It used to be called the Lord Nelson. Yeah, just a couple of hundred.
Yeah.
But back in 1306. There was a Rovers return with apostrophe, I think, in Withy Grove in Manchester, and this is where the Arndale Centre is now. It is no longer there.
It's been demolished in 1958, but it dates all the way back to medieval times.
Yeah. It always used to claim to be the oldest pub in Manchester. There was another pub that would also make that claim as well, but there were no records that say when it became a pub, because it was just like a medieval mansion kind of place. There's pictures of it. It looks very old Tudory sort of house. Although this predated
it's very
the Tudor
ramshackle
times,
looking in the picture that we've got.
Yeah, we've got a few pictures. It's got that classic white with black beams and everything.
Yeah, the Tudor looking.
Yeah, it doesn't look anything like the current Rovers, but this was absolutely what.
It's got like a bay window front.
Yeah, this is exactly what Tony Warren says he based the Rovers return on. It's really quite fascinating, and there's like drawings of it. It was a real important pub for the people living in Manchester back at the time, and we know that. Although we don't know exactly when it first started serving beer, we do know that when Manchester Cathedral was built in 1421, you could go there, or the workers went there to have. That's incredible that it predates Manchester Cathedral, isn't it? And the first couple who were married in Manchester Cathedral also had their wedding breakfast in the Rovers as well. There's signs that are like, call it Ye Olde Rovers Return as well, just for that. That's for that classic feel. But it stopped trading as a pub in 1923, so 100 years ago this year actually, and it was demolished in 1958.
Such a shame it was demolished, but now we've got the Arndale.
Now we've got the Arndale Centre. So,
are you going to mention the fact that there is this phantom apostrophe?
I could do. What do you want me to say about it?
Tony Warren didn't really have much of a care for grammar, did he?
Not so much. Not just mere apostrophes, no.
He didn't really know where he would put the apostrophe, so he just left it off.
Left it off when he came to do the actual Rovers in the pub. So
that's why it's not called... It hasn't got an apostrophe in there.
Yes.
And so we will never know whether it was one rover or many. And that's a mystery that we'll never...
Well, they talked about that just recently on Classic Coronation Street in 2002 when they had Lillian Spencer's son come into the pub, and one of the first things he said to Fred was, "Where's the apostrophe?"
That's what you would
all
say.
the snobs are all like me, are pointing out the missing
Walking
apostrophe.
around with pens, correcting everybody's grammar.
So, like all the interior sets of Coronation Street back in late 1960, it was filmed in the studio at first. So there was no outdoor set in the early days of Coronation Street. Everything was indoors.
At the very beginning of Coronation Street, it was an indoor set. The whole street was kind of built, and they had to keep moving bits in and out, didn't they?
Yeah, and it was made to 3/4 scale. The Rovers itself, there was no upstairs. The set just stopped above the green Rovers Return sign.
Yeah, there was no window or anything above that.
No, but on the outside it did have the 2 bay windows that we still have these days, which look fairly similar. One of the main differences that you'll see if you look at those windows back then is that the one on the left said Select on the outside, and the one on the right said Public. So these were 2 of the 3 bars that you could go to, the Rovers regulars would go into inside the Rovers, both of which we'll come to later, but the Public is the main bit of the inside.
I think the Select was supposed to be for ladies.
No, the Snug was supposed to be for the ladies.
Snug, okay.
Yeah, the Select itself, that was the big kind of function room that was...
oh yeah, sorry.
That's all right. We're all learning here today. So there was, you have those 2 windows there, and then just to the right of the door kind of goes inwards, doesn't it? You've got your sign that says Rovers Return, which still exists to this day. I mean, it's funny how little the front of the pub has changed, really.
It's still got that
over the
that
60
tile.
years.
You couldn't tell it was green.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the fancy sign and everything. So you'd get the public bar, which is where you had the darts. Everyone just would come in. There were a couple of tables and chairs in there. Then you had the Snug, like you said, which had round tables, and that was where the ladies could go. I'm not sure about the laws, but there definitely were strange laws back in the day where women weren't allowed to I can't remember.
Women weren't allowed to stay at the bar once they'd ordered their drinks, and the Snug itself, I think, was women only. People would go.
But yeah, if you watch the show, you wouldn't really pick that up because characters like Elsie Tanner and things would stand at the bar, and I don't know whether that was supposed to deliberately be subversive or if everyone's like, well, that's a stupid law.
I think we're supposed to think that by the time the show started, even Annie Walker thought that was a little bit outdated, to be honest. But we'll get to the inside in just a bit. And now we talked about the Rovers changing size and shape and appearance and everything. And back in the very, very early days of the Rovers, you would see it looking utterly different on the outside, particularly in the closing sequences of some episodes.
Yeah, because they just didn't... The idea of there being a consistent, canon of show information is kind of really new, isn't it? As a concept. They wouldn't have imagined back then that they would be writing something or creating something that in 60 years' time people would be going, well, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so at the end of episode 3 and a few other episodes in the first couple of months of Coronation Street, I think it was before the credits came off, or maybe it was part of the credits, I don't remember, they would scroll from the shop all the way down to the Rovers, and then next to the Rovers was the vestry, apparently, which made no sense because we knew the vestry was at completely the opposite end of the street.
So they were trying to educate people about where everybody lived in the street. So at the very beginning they would go, this is the shop and this is where Florrie Lindley lives and she's played by this, and then they'd move all the way down.
Here's 13, here's Christina. So they go to the Rovers. Now, because the interior sets were never all up at the same time. They had to use like a photograph of Archie Street, and even then I think it was like a composite photograph, like a really elongated one that the camera just panned down. And because, like I said earlier, there wasn't even a pub on Archie Street, they had to kind of like tack one onto the end of this. But it was an actual, you know, brick building that they showed, wasn't it? And it had the Rovers Return sign on the front of it, but the Rovers Return sign that's to the right of the door as you go in, that was just like slap bang in the middle of a brick wall, which doesn't exist at all.
That must have been from the set, and they just slapped it on there to make everyone go, oh, that's the same thing.
Yeah, so I don't know what people at the time thought, because they would see the indoor set of the Outdoor of the Rovers, they'd see this and they go, hang on a minute, that's not the same. Or, yeah, like you said, maybe
they don't care.
People didn't care back in the old days.
They knew it was a representation, probably.
Yeah, and they even like what was next door to the Rovers wasn't completely consistent at the time. I mean, we knew that, you know, Uncle Albert was supposed to be there living at number 1, which was locked right on, you know, to the side of the Rovers. But then
hang on. That's where Ken lives now.
That's where Ken lives now, Uncle Albert.
So if you picture the street as it is now, you've got the Rovers Return, you've got the door, then there's that little archway.
But that didn't that only existed after the fire in '86.
And then you've got Ken's front door.
Yeah.
But then we watched an episode.
From 1961, where Harry Hewitt and Concepta Riley went out on a date somewhere, didn't they? And when they came back, there was just like a passageway that they could walk down just to the right of the door.
Yes, and it was like the Ginnell. They like transposed the Ginnell now, where you go behind the Rovers from the left under the tunnel, and it was like that had been transposed over there for them to walk behind all the buildings, come out to the front of the Rovers.
Yeah, it was
obviously
literally
they would have been walking through Albert Tatlock's house.
Yeah, so that didn't really make any sense. But it just kind of stood out to us again how weird it was, and how in the early days everything was very much in flux. They also used another pub called the Amalgamated Inn in an episode in. Firstly in 1964, and we were watching this on the DVDs a few years ago, weren't they? There was a story where Stan Ogden works for Amalgamated Steel Company as a chauffeur.
That's where there's Amalgamated Steel. There's a banner for that
in the precinct these days.
Yeah.
Still exists. So he was a chauffeur for that, and he had this massive Rolls Royce that he was driving for it. And as part of the story, he wanted to take friends and family out for a pootle outside in his Rolls. So he picks them outside the Rovers. So obviously they had to have a car driving down the street there,
which they couldn't
do indoors. No. So they found this pub called the Amalgamated Inn. Put Rovers Return over the top of it. It looks completely different, doesn't it?
It's got a white sort of paint, like what's it called, where you cover bricks?
Yeah.
And like a black banner with the Rovers Return written on it in white text. I don't know what the colour was.
No, because this is a black and white episode, wasn't it? I don't know what it was like, really.
No, it definitely doesn't look anything like the Rovers.
No, the one that was at the end of the ending sequence on episode 3, that looked slightly like it, but they didn't even try to make this look at all like the Rovers.
The Rovers has exposed like red brick, and this does have rendered white. But in the UK, there are lots of pubs which are like monstrous amalgamations of different buildings. So maybe if you're watching this, you would think, oh, well, maybe that's around the corner and there's like a different part that's got a different building style. That certainly isn't that weird in this country, is it?
Not necessarily.
Around the corner, this building looks like a completely different building.
The fact that this was in 1964 and the show had been going for long enough, I think people at the time would have been probably thinking, hang on a minute. They used it again in 1967, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right.
Annie was going off on a trip to Paris, and then they showed her driving away from it, and they used this Amalgamated Inn again.
They couldn't keep using it though, because in 1970 it was demolished, but luckily by then they had built an outdoor set, hadn't they, in 1968, and they made it out of wood.
Well, it was the same interior sets from before that they just put outside. That lasted about one winter season.
Well,
it started rotting away.
They didn't weatherproof it. It rotted and it was freezing, so they changed that, didn't they?
Yeah, this particular set was the one that was the actors hated. They said it was the coldest place on earth. So but at least it did have, you know, an upstairs bit. You could see Newton and Ridley
Windows.
Fine Ale sign there. There was one window. I mean, there's only been one window at the upstairs of the Rovers. Well, there's only been two windows upstairs in the Rovers recently since they moved to Media City. But at last, yeah, you had your proper brick. You still had like the public and the select window, but yeah, at last there was an actual pub there. Of course, you couldn't go inside it, and every time that you go inside the Rovers now, it's cuts to inside. But this is the first proper outdoor Rovers,
and it also reminds me of those like Wild West towns that they built for like westerns, where it's all made of wood, but for Coronation Street, it shouldn't really have been made of wood because it was supposed to be brick.
Yeah.
And so the signage had a different font, and it was just printed onto like a block of wood. It didn't have raised letters or anything we have now.
No, like that's the font of the Rovers has changed quite a bit. It used to be a lot thinner in the early days, didn't it? And it had like a little shadow on it as well in the interior set, and it was a bit fancier and curvier. Then when they had that amalgamated in one, it was just like, impact sort of block font, and this had a bit of a serif but no shadow, so it was just like it had been repainted again. But then by the time we had the lorry crash there in I can't remember when that was, 1970s something, or the mid 70s,
1979.
It was just Rovers Return in, fairly plain blocky serif font over the top of it. I find it really interesting seeing how that's all changed over the years.
So when it went to colour, was it like immediately it's green? It's always been
always
like
supposed
that
to be
forest
green. Yeah,
I
exactly.
really like that with the gold lettering.
Yeah. Now, sadly for the Rovers, in 1986 there was a fire there.
Oh no! I hope that doesn't happen again.
I'm sure it won't. No. But just before they'd done that, they'd moved to another new set again, because the actual filming location of Coronation Street had moved just around the Granada Studios kind of block. And when they did move in 1982, that was when they put that little nook next to, sort of separating the Rovers from number 1 Coronation Street, because everybody used to say how odd it was that you could go through some doors to get to the toilets on that first right-hand wall in the Rovers, but you'd be going into Albert's living room walking through there. So they put that little nook in the archway to try and fit toilets. It still doesn't really fit a toilet in there.
But you'll...
There's an awful lot of suspension of disbelief,
yes.
even these days on the Rovers, where the living quarters of the Rovers now would be out into Rosamond Street, wouldn't it? And there is literally nothing that Coronation Street can do about that to make it make sense.
No.
Like some things you can change, but not that.
I was even looking at it the other day when we were watching on TV. I can't remember if it was a classic or a recent one, where the viaduct goes into the back of the Rovers.
Yeah.
And so how does the garden fit? It doesn't.
It doesn't make sense, no. So like I said, we had that fire in 1986, and then once that was put out and then remodelled and everything, I think it was after that we had the raised golden lettering outside it, and that's what we now have these days. Yeah,
it's very classic, very heritage looking. You would have thought that would have been there the whole time, but actually this is kind of a simulacra of yes. What I think the 80s was kind of like, we've always been interested in heritage in the UK, but I think our idea of what that actually means changes more than you might think as the years go by. So having this up there makes it look like, it's like Victorian, is how it would have been in the time. No. Yeah. No, it wasn't.
Also, with the refit after the fire, we had the change in the windows, because gone from the interior was the Select. We'll talk more about that later. So, and the Snug. So it was literally just an expanded public inside. So the windows...
They took the words off.
Yeah, and they now just say Rovers Return with lots of
etched on in glass.
Fancy leafy kind of patterns. But you still got the light green tiles. You still got the name above the door. You still got the big green double doors. And it's remained fairly similar looking up until this point, apart from the move to Media City. When we had the second window put in.
Yeah, so the whole thing gets extended because the set is finally built on a 1-to-1 ratio. The set had been like you said at the very beginning, it was sort of 3/4 sort of the size, and finally we have wide enough street so that 2 cars can pass. And we've got an extra window in the Rovers.
The actors can walk at a normal speed, because before they had to walk
Like,
slowly.
to like go, la, la, la,
Otherwise
la.
it'd be one end of the street to the other before you know it.
Yeah, and so we've got now two windows. We've got a flagpole. We've got... Isn't that a flagpole?
Yeah, there's a flagpole. I mean, there were flagpoles before the move as well.
We've
There's also
got
like little
serifs on the...
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at a picture now of the Rovers fire in 2013, and the little kind of tilled things to the left and the right of Rovers aren't there then. So I think that they must have been added after the fire, but it was still there on the old Key Street set, because we've got a picture here of the one windowed pub with the little tills.
So I thought that was added for Media City, but obviously
no,
not.
apparently not. So yeah, that's how the exterior of the Rovers has changed, and the interior of the old Rovers was just kind of left to be dismantled, and now there's nothing there anymore. Very, very sad.
Right, now we're gonna talk about the inside. Okay?
Yes. Okay. So we're going into the public now.
If you've got the 60th anniversary book, you will find on pages 19...
No, this isn't the 60th anniversary book. This book that we've got here is the Tim Randall book that was released in the 1990s, the Rovers Return one.
So you can find the layout.
Was it Tim Randall? No, sorry, I'm wrong. This is Darren Little book.
Yeah, so the life and times of the Rovers Return. Inside this book, there is a
map.
Floor
plan, yeah. So the YouTube video, we got the book right here. You can hear all the flapping about. But with the YouTube video will show this map, and it is kind of useful to see the different floor plans, and you can see how it's changed from pre-fire to post-fire. How ridiculous it was to try and fit everything in, because they both sort of show that
there is nowhere for this to go.
No, with the original layout, the pre-fire layout, the fact that the Select was so big, it did make sense that the living quarters would fit into it, wouldn't it?
To the side. So the Select doesn't exist anymore, and the Select was a place where you would have a large function.
Yeah.
So if you imagine like a community centre or a big pub that does weddings and stuff, they had a big room. It had a little stage at the end, and they would do performances, and sometimes they'd have like anniversary parties and things. Now everything just gets crammed into what is the public.
Yeah.
And there's no room for that. But what you're calling the living quarters is like the bit now where you'd have Jenny and Daisy retreating to the back room. There's nowhere for that to go. That would just be right in the middle of the road.
The problem pre-fire was, although it all fit nicely into a box alongside each other, it would be still extending way out into Rosamond Street. Nowadays, you're still expanding into Rosamond Street, but there's nothing alongside the living quarters. It just doesn't make sense. So let's look at the public for a bit, shall we? So right from the early days.
So back in the day, if you imagine the bar, the horseshoe shape of the bar, and you're coming into the Rovers and you turn left.
Mm-hmm.
There would be at the end of the U, there would just be a door, so that the bar is cut into like 2/3 one end and 1/3 the other. So the snug, which is through a door, has access to the bar the other side, but half of like a 2/3 of it is kind of out into the public.
And next to the snug door, you'd have the Select door, which would take you through into that.
So you go through the front door of the Rovers, you turn left, and you can see door to the Select and a door to the snug. And the snug is where you'd have Annie, Mina, and Mama, and they would sit there and.
But the actual public itself, so that was quite a lot smaller than the main bar is now, because it was cut off by those doors. But you still had it still very much looked. You can recognise it today, can't you? With the
like
layout.
The Rovers.
You go on.
So you go in through the door, and in front of you, you've got the bar. And then to the right of that, you've got a dartboard, and then on that wall there is the doors to the toilets, the ladies and the men's.
Yeah.
Now I love this layout because the dartboard is on the wall, and the doors going into the toilets are on that wall. So people are throwing darts into the area where you're coming in and out of a doorway, and it's possible that you open the door and walk out and get a face full of darts.
Well, technically, if you're the gent, because back in those days, there were 2 doors to the toilet, and these days you got one door that apparently goes into a little corridor that then splits off into men and women's, which again doesn't make sense with the space that we've got. But back then you had the gents' toilet access right by the dartboard there, and the women's was kind of about where the jukebox is now.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying is you would stand where that is and you'd throw the darts all the way down.
Yeah.
So you'd get women and men.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But the darts aren't there nowadays.
No, the darts have been moved all the way to where the select would be.
Yeah.
And where the dartboard is, there's like sometimes there's a piano, and sometimes there's just like a weird little nook now.
Yeah, there's a nook that leads out into where the smoking shelter's supposed to be.
One thing that's been there for a long time, which I think is quite funny, is the hot pie dispenser.
Oh yeah, I mean that wasn't there right from the 60s. That was added over time. But
another thing that I just want to quickly say that kind of gets added later is the shelving unit. Because if you imagine the bar, you've got the base area, which is like the counters, and then above it is like a big mirrored kind of horseshoe shape, where you can see that they store things, like bags of crisps and all that kind of stuff. That didn't exist at the beginning. It was just a plain ceiling.
Yeah. What they also used to have behind the bar was a little kind of cabinet sort of thing right in the middle of where like people would be milling around. And apparently the actors didn't used to like that. They used to kind of get in their way. So that was kind of retired eventually. So I think in 1964 that went. So there's been lots of decoration work going on in the Rovers. So in 1968, after the fire, it was redecorated. The walls had been, beforehand fairly plain, but we got to see a little bit more pattern in the wallpaper now. Fairly hideous. It's 1970s pattern, as you might imagine.
Still don't know what the colour was.
Well, not in the
colour?
It's just all brown, wasn't it?
Well,
I've got a black and white picture of it here, but this was when Corrie was in colour.
Yeah.
The actual bar itself would change as well, wouldn't it? Like it was beforehand, just all one kind of shade of wood, but they decided to paint a bit of it in just to make it look extra garish at this point.
The panels they painted.
Yeah. Another thing that we haven't mentioned before that I really liked is the Annie and Jack picture that they used to have behind the bar as well.
Like a caricature that somebody's painted of them.
Yeah,
as a couple with big heads and tiny bodies.
Very quaint. And when they had that refit in the end of the 60s, early 70s, they would also paint the doors to the toilets with like dark black around the outside of the panels and a kind of cream in the middle.
I think this was fashionable.
It's like bogs over here, you can't miss them. I mean, there were various bits of decoration work carried out in 73, 77, 83, but it all pretty much stayed the same. One of the things that they did as well, I forgot to say earlier, was taking the pumps out. So on the 1968 redecoration, there had been pumps up at the bar, but then they got rid of them, and they weren't even put back until the early 90s as well.
That's really weird.
Really weird.
How did they serve pints then?
Well, I think they had just like little mini ones, but the actual big pull your massive handle down pumps, they went 20 odd years without having at all. We also by 1980 the wallpaper was still just just gross,
geometric. Well, right. So we're not going to go into this history of decorations, but back in those days you would have needed, and still to this day I guess, horrible garish patterned carpet, which didn't exist in the Rovers because they didn't need to see the floor very much, to hide the stains from beer swills and goodness knows what else. Well, it would have been
sawdust back then. When Annie Walker moved in, like pre-Corrie starting, it was definitely a spit and sawdust place.
And the walls would have had certain types of wallpaper to hide the stains of smoke and nicotine yellowing it. So these kind of patterns are like an optical illusion to hide dirt. So that's why that pattern existed. Yeah,
but it was very geometric, wasn't it? The walls by 1980 were wood panelling up to hip height, and then we had this horrible round and stripy kind of wallpaper. To be honest though,
that wallpaper would look nice now.
Do you reckon?
Yeah.
I don't know, I wouldn't have it myself.
I think okay.
The tables and chairs there are all very different. Well, if we think about the Rovers at the moment, you got your booths, haven't you? But even that they weren't put in until after the 1986 Rovers fire, so it was very simple, kind of wooden table and chair sort of affair. But I also did like the Newton and Ridley kind of mirror-y picture that they had on the side wall as well.
And also the tables there, some of the tables I think they still exist in the Rovers now, are very heavy with metal kind of
legs,
filigree on the legs. And actually when we went to the Navigation Inn, which used to be owned by Pat Phoenix, they had almost identical
same sort of things there.
So I don't know if that was there because of her but it's just the sort of thing you'd have in a pub, and it would be there for decades because it's so sturdy.
There was also a little bench that you could sit on, if it right underneath the windows where the booths are now. Seat. There was just a little wooden bench that you could sit on. And in 1983 they redecorated, and it was a little less garish, the wallpaper that they used there. It was more kind of squares and rectangles for a little bit. Still very, very brown. Brown has been the theme of the Rovers pretty much all of its side.
It goes with the wood colour, doesn't it?
Yeah, it didn't stand out quite so much. But then, all went a little bit wrong in 1986. This is the first fire.
Oh, the same fire.
This is the same fire that I've been talking about earlier. This is the one. This is the one that Bet had to be rescued from. And
this is where she was sick, and she was like, "I'm so glad that this carpet hides."
So after that, this is when they put the booths in. They had the glass panels between the booths,
and those glass panels with the stained glass patterns in it. They again look Victorian. They look like they've been there the whole time. Where did they get them from? Don't know.
Those have changed slightly over the years. Yes. They've got different patterns, but that's was really the beginning of what we consider the modern Rovers layout. There were some little upholstered seats at the side as well, like as soon as you go in there, past the pictures on the wall, which are now up there. Not the nowadays board. We've got like a photo board of famous barmaids and customers and whatever over the year, but they had kind of Tasteful Manchester pictures up there for a little bit in the mid 80s and 90s, this was when, like I said earlier, they got rid of the snug. They knocked through the Select, but the amount of space that was taken up by the Select wasn't represented in the new size of the Rovers. We just kind of forgot about it.
So now the Rovers, if you look at the whole area, which is now just the public, which isn't really called the public anymore, it's just the bar area, you can see and imagine to yourself that it exists in the space that is afforded to it by the bay windows.
Yeah.
So there's a tiny little bit beyond the bay windows where you're throwing darts at the wall, which would go out onto the walls the other side of Coronation Street. So everything fits in that space, yes, but don't think about where Jenny and Daisy are going when they walk out to where they gossip and natter. Make hot pots.
As well as all of that, they also had a little snack bar put opposite the door, like on the wall that now leads to the smoking shelter. There was a shelf there for a little bit, and that was kind of it. And the wallpaper changed again. It was more I don't even know how I would describe the sort of pattern that we've got there.
I think traditionally in the UK.
Maybe.
Pubs and Indian restaurants would all get their wallpaper from the same place, where they would just have really flowery, elaborate, very decorative patterns and and all reds and golds and browns.
This is also when we started to see the piano. The piano was put next to that upholstered seating on the side, and also a fruit machine was put in on the other side of the bar where that still is these days. And that particular version of the Rovers decor stayed pretty much the same for over a decade, so they really kind of they liked the look of that. They put a phone in and everything, and it wasn't until 2008.
Where's the phone?
The phone on the left-hand side of the bar.
So the phone's been there right at the very beginning, though.
Oh yeah, there was. Oh no,
so
you're
just
right,
just to say, this is why it's fascinating to me about how the layout is, and going back to the very early episodes, because the phone was in the bar and you could access it. The patrons could access it.
Yeah.
But this was a service for the community because not everybody had a telephone. And so sometimes in really important news would come through on the telephone, or somebody would have to use the telephone to make a call.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have their own.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
and now they, obviously nobody really cares that. I don't think anyone
really uses
knows
that anymore.
that there's a phone there
now. So in 2008, that's when Vernon Tomlin, remember him?
He's made
Liz's
Vernon
husband.
Tomlin, forgettable character, but actually incredibly important to the history of Rovers and the layout.
He's the one that put the smoking shelter out the back. He redecorated in 2008, so it was kind of a bit more Paisley-ish, I guess, in the patterns there. It wasn't a massive change, but it was a change for a bit.
He's the reason that you've got that passageway that takes you from the bar back to where the yard at the back of the Rovers, where the smoking shelter was put in. The reason that was put in was because the cigarettes were banned, smoking was banned indoors in the UK, so all the patrons had to go and smoke outside, especially Liz, who famously enjoyed a cigarette or two. And so that then also helped during COVID, when you had to have a one-way system for the patrons to come in. They could collect their hot pots, and then they would have to walk out the back, and that was kind of beneficial for the business because you had to have COVID controls and a one-way system. So who knew in 2008 that when you put this passageway in, it would be used for a pandemic?
Very true. What else have we seen change? The wallpaper has kind of gone more dark reddy orangey kind of colour now. It was destroyed in the fire in 2013, but what we've got now is I think it's most tasteful yet. I quite like the reddy
it's
sort
red
of
it's
colour.
red and gold. It feels like a very traditional looking pub, and in a weird way it actually looks more heritage now than it did in the 60s.
Yeah, you're right. It was a lot plainer there. There's more kind of little accoutrements.
But again, it's an affectation of modern day that we think is historical, but it actually isn't. It's just modern day tastes in decor.
Of course, we do have the jukebox that's in there now. We've got the picture of Betty on the wall, who's been there for 10 odd years or so.
Do you know what? That whenever I look at the picture of Betty smiling down at everybody, it reminds me of the way that in police stations they had a picture of the Queen and now presumably King Charles as like, this is like the boss, the patron saint. We're doing it all for Liz. But in the Rovers, she is the patron saint Betty of
exactly.
Hot Pots.
She watches down on us all, doesn't she?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how the public has changed, the main bar bit of the Rovers. Let's kind of take a little trip to some of the other rooms then. So we have mentioned the Snug earlier. I don't think there's a whole lot to say about it, but it's where the fruit machine is now. It was where, most famously, Ina Sharples, Martha Longhurst, Minnie Coldwell would be sitting there drinking their milk stouts or whatever in the early episodes. So it was a really iconic part of the Rovers, and it was, I think, a lot of people's favourite bits when it would cut to them and see what they're gossiping about.
And it's interesting how the the kind of doorway and the wall served to separate these three characters from the rest of the street's residents who would mostly remain in the public. So it's like they were isolated, but they were also aloof and judgmental of everybody, and that kind of geography of the pub helped to emphasise their separateness.
I'm just looking at a picture now, and it looks like they had an old wireless or something on the bar where the phone is now for a little bit.
Well, if you think back to the war and stuff, they would have used that to play announcements for everybody.
Yeah. They also, I'm remembering some episodes from the early 60s as well, might have like a bank of seats up against the back wall as well, where the fruit machine is now, because I can picture some scenes where like non-speaking extra old women with their headscarves on and everything would natter away in the background, or maybe Minnie would be talking with one of them while Martha and Ina are at the chair and table and chair and something. But
so this is where women would have to go sit to drink their beers, and maybe a bit cheaper, half
penny cheaper to get you drinking there, exactly. And I think probably the most famous thing that happened in there was Martha Longhurst's death as well in 1965.
Yeah, that was just had to disinfect everything.
Yeah, but
and
yeah,
then get rid of it and burn it down.
all gone now. All
To
gone now.
exercise.
There is still, I think, a table there where they used to sit. But yeah,
Yes, there is. Yeah,
it's the fruit machine. There's the fireplace there. There's another window there. It's just all amalgamated.
and yeah, the fireplace
into...
there with its random like brass junky decorations, which I think are I just love all of that, and the horse brasses, and it's just like, why none of this makes any sense for why it's in the Rovers, because in a country pub these are all kind of things that you would have picked up or had in your house, or the lucky charms for the horseshoes and all that kind of stuff, but why it's in a pub in Salford, I don't. It's just because we like it and we associate these things with nice, cosy pubs.
Yeah.
But they are artifacts of our kind of aesthetics rather than being logical.
Well, why would they be there?
Yeah.
So let's move on to the Select then, because this is it was
Select.
never used as much as any other parts of the Rovers.
It was a special occasion situation, and it's a shame that it doesn't exist anymore, because there were so many events where it would make sense that it would be there.
Well, like a few years ago, we had like Jeff's Magic Show, and they I think they put on a pantomime there. I think it was the one where Amy swore in the middle of a pantomime or something, and Becky was Cinderella or something, and they just have to cram it into that back wall of the Rovers now, and a Select would be perfect for that.
Now, just like Roy's Rolls, the Rovers set is actually a lot wider and bigger and more space than you would think if you watched it on the set on TV, because of how the camera angles make everything look closer together than it actually is. So in real life, it kind of, there is enough space for you to have a party and a bop about and a hen do for Daisy, etc. But on TV, it looks like everybody's kind of sitting in each other's pockets.
Yeah. So the Select itself, then, that was shown in 1961. So within the first year of the program being on air, the viewers were shown this bit exists. Annie Walker in mid 1961 was already talking about knocking through the Select and the Snug and just expanding the public, but obviously it took a fire for that to be able to happen. But it was just like a big hallway kind of room. There was another fireplace there was a piano there was a stage at one end, and I think Annie just liked the idea that it was a bit more of an exclusive sort of area. People would go in there and get waiter service. In the past, the drinks would be a halfpenny more expensive in there.
Yeah, and they also had some, like Stan and Hilda had their 25th and their 40th anniversary parties there. Was that when Rita found out that
it was the 40th.
Len had died?
Stan and Hilda's 40th wedding anniversary.
And we also had, at one point we had, was it Betty and...
Betty and Bet?
Yes, performing as Laura and Hardy. On the stage.
Yeah, that was at a
1973.
Yes, so there was a cabaret. I can't remember what the reason for it was. They had a bet with the men, and the men won, and
so they would have to dress in drag.
Their penalty was the women dressing in drag. So they were drag
kings. So we've got the first drag kings.
Yeah, we do indeed.
In Coronation Street, were Bet and Betty.
Yeah, there was like a 1940s show as well. On Christmas Day in 1972. So that had like them all dressed up in old timey kind of clothes. Alf and Ernest on the tinkling on the piano did something.
See,
Rita was dressed up as
Marlene Dietrich.
Yeah.
Now this was good because this gave some of the veteran performers a chance to show their chops, because a lot of them during the war performed for troops, and they were also, there's a massive history of cabaret performances and singers and just entertainers working on Coronation Street as actors.
Yeah.
And a lot of them.
This was just right up their street. They're probably gutted when it was gutted.
So it's interesting to think about the fact that, these days we have like pop stars, like Shane Ward and Kim Marsh coming in and working, and everyone's like, oh, who do they, they want to be actors now. But back in the day, people were a lot more versatile, and everyone accepted the fact that some of these, trying to think like hall performers. I can't remember what.
Yeah, musical sort of.
Musical, yeah. There's this rich tradition in that of Coronation Street, and so it's actually really nice when people transition from a singing career into working on choreo. It's just part of history.
Yeah,
part of the history of the show.
So the room itself, the decoration in the room, I think it kind of matched what was going on in the public at the time. There was like wood panelling up to a hip height again, and then wallpaper after that. There was like little shelves quite high up on the walls where various bits and bobs and bottles and pictures and things would be put on. There's a big metal plate on the wall at one point. So it's real shame, I think, that doesn't exist anymore, but it's completely understandable why they got rid of it with it not making sense with it being there.
And just a quick, again, an aside, if you're listening to this on the podcast version and you're having trouble visualising, it might be beneficial for you to watch some of this on YouTube.
I'm doing my best to try and make this so that it makes sense as an audio only, but it's very difficult. I'm hoping that the YouTube video does add to it.
The YouTube video will add to it, but hopefully we're describing things and you can use your imagination for some of them.
And then check the YouTube afterwards and see if you're right.
Yeah, so the toilets now.
Yeah, Gemma, I need to go to the toilet.
Well, before the fire, you would have had to go, as you said, through 2 separate doors, and now post-fire you go through one door. And they don't really have very many scenes in there.
No, not really. There's only so much you can do in a toilet, isn't there? I don't think anyone wants to see in there. But I quite like that there are bits of the Rovers like this. A bit like the cellar as well, which we'll come to later, that we know are there. And when you go inside, it's a little bit of a treat.
It is like when you were a kid and you went on to a birthday party at McDonald's and you got to go in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah. It's just like that, actually, isn't it? And the Rovers kitchen, I suppose, is similar as well. We saw... I don't know every time that we've seen the toilets in the Rovers, but there was one scene that I found in late 1988. It was at a wedding, and Jack went in there because he thought that somebody had pinched his jacket. So he goes and accosts this man in the toilet and says, "Hey, can you just lift up the back flap of your jacket, please?" He gets beaten up.
But innuendo.
I don't know whether this toilet was filmed in an actual toilet somewhere because it was so infrequently used. But here it was just all white tiles all over the place.
It's very utilitarian. The toilets are very basic looking and white tiles, and then like a painted area above which has changed
now
colours.
It is, yeah. There was a stage about sort of 5 years or so ago where they clearly had the toilet set in the Rovers ready to go, and you saw like a spate of scenes being taken place in there. So now you got the men's toilet is, like I said, white tiles with blue above it, and the ladies' toilet is very similar but with pink above it. I'm wondering whether it's the same set and they just repaint it every time they want to go to a different one. One thing I think is interesting, and I've got a picture here of Sean in the Rovers' toilet. I'm wondering whether that picture that's on the wall next to him, it looks very much like Ye Olde Rovers Return.
It does.
So I think that's quite a nice little tribute to its namesake.
There was a picture done as like a illustration of the oldie Rovers return as a tribute to its heritage in Manchester history. So maybe that's nice.
Yeah.
And there's also a streetcars sign in there in case you run in there and you need a wee and you're like, okay, so fed up with this guy, I'm gonna...
There was a story in the Rovers toilets about 5 years ago which was to do with Steve retiling it, and I remember just there being a scene where all the tiles dropped off the wall because he was so useless at it. And then there was ones that you saw these in the toilets, and Eileen, there was one scene, I can't remember what the context was when I remember somebody looking over the edge of a toilet and Eileen being down there. I also remember, do you remember Lolly?
Yeah, I love Lolly.
So there was a scene where she went into the toilet and overheard, I think, Rana and Kate maybe bad-mouthing her or something. But yeah, only so much that you can say about the Rovers toilets.
The thing about sets like this, they exist and they've been made, and sometimes they have to be used because they've been made, so you might as well make use of them. But also, you got to think about each studio's got different number of sets in it, and sometimes you'd be filming different units at the same time, and so that you've got to have a scene in this studio with these sets. So we'll put something in the sometimes the reason that plots exist or that they're taking place in a certain set is just because of production reasons.
Yeah. So
I don't really know why all the scenes took place there, but that's something just to consider. Why did we used to have set scenes in the loo and we don't now? Because actually there's a lot more space now. They've expanded, even making Victoria Street, that's now freed up a lot of extra space for filming outdoors, so you're not going to maybe have as many toilet scenes.
As I say, there weren't very many toilet scenes to be fair. I just found another picture from 2008. This must be the ladies there, and they had a different colour scheme back then, so it kept the kind of Rovers green sort of colour, didn't it?
Yeah, they've definitely decorated a few times over the years, and again, it's one of these things where it's like, it's just. Whatever they fancy.
What more can you say about the toilets? No, I think we've exhausted ourselves there. So Rover's cellar now. So I love the idea that underground Coronation Street, there's this like labyrinthian world there that you only rarely get a little peek into. And they spoke about the cellar in the Rovers right from the early days. The difference was that back in 1961, they used to access the cellar from the back room, didn't they? Again, we watched an episode which had Annie and Jack entertaining
for their daughter and
in-laws. Yeah, that's right. And Jack and the father of the husband to be was just like, I'm just going to go down to cellar, and there was an extra door in the back room that they went down.
Yeah.
But by mid 1961, I think. That idea was gone, and it is now access it through the gents' toilets. So it just kind of again showed that they didn't quite have it locked down how you got everywhere in the early days.
Now, if you're not from the UK, almost every traditional pub will have a cellar where they put all the barrels, and the barrels get connected with like pipes and things, and they're connected to the pumps, and so when you pull the pump, the beer is coming from the cellar area, and there'll be a sort of a hatch outside somewhere on the street that can be opened up for the brewery to deliver the big barrels of beer that get stored underground. And that's why every so often they'll go, I've got to go and change the barrel, or they go downstairs and do something.
Yeah, but we very rarely see it. We did see in 1965 there was a story where there was a burst pipe down in the cellars. And I don't know whether this was the first look at that we ever got at the Rovers cellars, but it seemed like quite a massive room.
This looks like a cavern. This looks like a proper like a Victorian, tunnel underground. It's almost like a sewer with the arch kind of roof and the brickwork, and it looks a bit like a murder hole.
Does a little bit. Since in 1976 there was another famous scene where Albert and Stan got locked down there. Pretty much most of the scenes that have taken place in the cellar involve people being trapped down there
and having to drink their way out.
Basically it was. So they got trapped down there one night, and then Hilda's wondering where Stan is.
Locked them in by accident.
Yeah. Hilda goes around, she thinks that Stan's seeing a fancy woman somewhere on Balaclava Terrace or something, but no, they're just having a jolly old time getting themselves drunk in the cellar. And back then you kind of went downstairs, and there was a wall to your right, and then all the barrels were there kind of on your left.
Yeah, it's
as
like
you
a
went
rickety
in.
old wooden staircase. So it's really kind of spooky down there.
Oh yeah, it is. I want to see down there more often. Then you had the Rovers fire in 1986. That was caused in the cellar, by the way. So Jack went down there one night when there was a power cut, and there was a dodgy fuse. So he went down there to fix the fuse, but not being a trained electrician, he got it a bit wrong, and that's why the Rovers set on fire. And when it came back again, we next saw the cellar. I'm making that up. The next picture that I've got of the cellar is in 2008, and it's like everything switched over completely. So when you go down the steps to the cellar now, the barrels are to your left. It's like the stairs have been moved to a completely different place, isn't it? And the barrels are to your right, and on your left you got a door with a little mini arch and some like shelves where things are piled up there, boxes and bottles of wine and everything.
White.
All just white brick.
And all the crisps are down there.
It all looks like proper mucky and grimy and everything, but
it's not nice.
Still fairly spacious, I have to say. The second Rovers fire in 2013 also was started down there, but that was Carl doing it on purpose because he wanted to make it look like Jason had done some dodgy electrics in there, because he wasn't happy with Jason going out with Stella at the time.
So just to be clear, there were 2 fires.
I think we get that
in the history of the Rovers, and they both got started in the cellar, and nobody's bricked it up yet.
Well, you think with all the bricks there that it might be contain it.
You think they would put like a sprinkler system in now?
Maybe.
I think they're like, it's not going to happen the third time. Everyone knows that that things never happen in threes.
So in 2008, Dan Mason gets trapped down the cellar in the Rovers. He's been having a bit of a spat with Steve McDonald's because Steve's car has been scratched. It was actually Norris, but he thought it was Dan. So he, as a prank, traps Dan down in the cellar, and Dan ends up getting a bit roughed up during this and gets a ruptured spleen. So he has to stay overnight in the Rovers cellar with a ruptured spleen. So that's not so good for him.
There's a lot of trapped negative energy in the cellar, and you know what I say?
Haunted.
Show me the ghosts.
Show you the... Yeah, exactly. We had a scene in 2015 where Steve and Lloyd get trapped down there because they'd had an argument as well. So Michelle and Andrea, their two partners, trapped them down the road in the Rovers cellar to try and and say, you're not coming down until you sort yourselves out. They make up pretty quickly and let's make use of this, and then they decide to get themselves drunk, but also put on fake arguments and are shouting at each other so
they can stay there longer.
So the women think that they haven't
worked it out yet. And this is the steps have changed from being
the steps are
wooden to being galvanised metal.
I'm looking back at the old photos. I'm not sure when that change was made, but definitely in the last 10 years.
I like the fact that Steve and Lloyd were locked down there. You know, I don't know how many years, 40.
What? 40 what?
That after Albert and
it's a Corrie tradition.
Well, it's not really. It's happened twice.
Well, yeah, maybe.
But I really like that. You know, it's interesting that in historical kind of terms, we had Albert and Stan. I would say Stan is a lot more of a famous character. But they were both very popular at the time. And then you've got Steve and Lloyd, and Steve's definitely more of a iconic character than Lloyd, but they were both also very popular at the time.
Yeah, very true. I think the last time that we saw the cellar, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, I usually am. I think the last time that we saw the Rovers cellar was when Henry went down there, Henry Newton.
#Bring back Henry.
#Bring back Henry, of course. He ends up throwing himself down the steps, doesn't he? Because he wants to sue Jenny and Johnny to get some money, because he wanted to buy the pub. I think he had bought the pub beforehand, and then it didn't last for too long.
He troubled man.
He ends up working there, but wants to get some compo. And I remember there's a scene of him just sitting on the steps, he couldn't bring himself to throw himself down and hurt himself. Too much of a coward. But he does in the end. He hurts his arm.
It is really lovely to think that very, very few characters have actually had the privilege of being filmed
how many have actually
in the
been
cellar,
down there.
And our Henry Newton is one of them.
Yeah.
And what a fitting place for him to be.
So let's go back upstairs again. Through the public, we'll go into the hallway.
Oh yes, the hallway with the famous switching staircase.
Yeah.
It is again like Harry Potter, you know, when they're walking.
The stairs move.
The stairs move.
There is a reason for this. I mean, as always, the reason is fire.
That's right, there were 2 fires during the history of the Rovers.
Was there really?
Yeah,
I had no idea about that. I think we might have mentioned that before. Yeah, when you first go into the hall, they had big double doors. They're still got fairly big double doors, but I think they seemed bigger back in the olden days.
Just to say, Michael, when I say just to be clear, and I say something that seems obvious to everybody, it's because I'm just kind of digesting it myself and thinking, maybe there's someone else who doesn't know this. But probably not.
You're the information giver, Gemma. You're the wise woman.
I'm just reading stuff that you've told me to read out.
You know it. So when you
it was a lot more of a spacious hallway back in the day, and it also was where the other telephone, I think the private telephone, where Annie could get gossip and things.
The black one was there, yeah, and it had a little table there by the side of the stairs. The thing that they had, quite a lot of scenes in sort of going through from the bar to the back room, although I don't think it was ever like one continuous shot kind of thing, which I think you can do these days. The thing that I love best about this hall, my bit of Rovers early hallway trivia, is not the switch around stairs though, but the fact that there was a second door there. So at the moment, you've got the Rovers hallway with the door at the bottom of the stairs that leads out into the yard, and they did have that then.
There's 3 doors. There's the door that goes from the pub into the hallway into the back room, and then the hallway out into the yard where sometimes people will run in.
Yeah. But then in 1961, they had a mysterious extra doorway that led into, I don't really know where.
The street,
and it was
presumably.
Well, it would make no sense. It's literally you go through the door at the back of the Rover, at the back of the bar. Straight on takes you to the back room. To the right takes you to the yard. To the left, well, that would lead you into the Select. But on Joan Walker's wedding episode in early 1961, that's the way that the bridal party exited the Rovers, and all the old women were there waiting outside to welcome them, wouldn't they?
So that would be on Rosamond Street now, kind of in front of where the chip shop is.
But
doesn't exist anymore.
It does
obviously.
not. I don't think they use that very often. That was another case of they didn't really have the layout pinned down in the early days.
Oh, we can talk about the decorations, can't we?
Yes. It was a bit plainer in the olden days. The stairs case there was kind of dark wood at the time.
Wasn't it a bit similar to the main public, where it's all kind of dark wood and beige, and then I think Annie gets her hands on some
lighter paint, just to freshen it up a bit.
Some magazines maybe, and makes it floral wallpaper.
Yeah, horrible floral wallpaper again in the second half of the 70s. The door to the Rovers was kind of like peachy brown sort of colour, isn't it? Not to my taste, I have to say. Actually, it was me that burned the Rovers down, I'm going to say it, in 1986.
I thought it was Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen.
Yeah.
Come on, darlings, get rid of this interior. It's hideous.
Well, the fire happened in 1986, and that's got the famous scene of the fire in the staircase and Bette doing that big scream at the top of the stair.
Ow!
And then when the pub is open, it kind of looks like a completely different space. It doesn't really make sense. That it's almost like the hallway is not as long.
Yeah.
After the Rovers fire, everything's kind of packed in a little bit more tightly.
There's also a lot. They've also changed it a bit more too, because where the door is now, there's a little wall, and then the doorway to the back room, and that little tiny bit of wall is actually a lot longer now in modern times, because you can fit a lot more coats there.
Oh yeah, I mean it doesn't even have a coat rack. Back in the day, it had like a fuse box. Yeah.
I guess they moved the fuse box so that it could burn down the road.
They did sometimes put a little a hat stand or whatever that they could put their coats on, didn't they? But so the main change there was the stairs going backwards, so that you'd be like, when you went up the stairs, you'd be above where the back of the bar would be.
I don't know why they did this.
I don't really know either, really. They must have had a good reason for it, but who am I to say what it is? The wallpaper had kind of like peachy vine sort of decorations on. For a little bit, and we just got to see an awful lot of Bette and Alec traipsing back and forth between it. The carpet changed from like beigey brown to dark red over the course of the 1990s.
And a lot of times you really will never see carpets.
No, and the main reason I know that was because they were the scenes when Jack and Vera got trapped upstairs in the Rovers.
Angles are sort of going down.
Exactly, yeah, and Alec had. Well, they first kind of barricaded themselves upstairs, didn't they? Because they didn't want Alec to kick them out, and then he had the stairs removed. So that was quite fun. So that was kind of it. I mean, over the years, we've had basically various other floral patterns put on the wall there. Big paintings. It has been modernised a bit more since the Rovers fire, and now it's got more like white wood panelling, hasn't it? Again, it's looking a little bit more classic in style these days.
Which was
and it's kind of got
artificial wooden floor.
It's gone from carpet to wooden floor now. It's just got like nice.
It's got like a country house feel.
Yeah,
which it never had before.
No, that's kind of where should we go upstairs? Should we have a little look upstairs, see how that's changed? Because that's another one of my favourites about. It's another place that we see very, very rarely, except at a period in the early 2008, 2010, when they had loads of scenes up there. We'll come back to that in a minute. We didn't see a whole lot of upstairs in the Rovers in the early years, as far as I'm aware. I mean, they had that scene with the sea lion in the bath in 1964, because just for hilarious
Well, that was when, if you listen to our strike bonus episode, you'll know that there were strikes and lots of the actors didn't appear during that period of time, so they had to hire animals.
Was that 64 or was that 62? I can't remember now. But so we got to see the Rovers bathroom.
I think it probably was. Yeah.
Sometimes we also got to see Annie in bed, because there was a scene where she gets the house gets invaded,
Accosted.
didn't she? This is in 1975. Jack was dead, so she was living on her own in the Rovers at this point. And these two youths break into the Rovers, and so we get to see the interior of Annie Walker's boudoir.
Yes, with her ridiculously high ceilings. And
Yeah.
what was this? Was it a light pool?
Yeah, she had a long,
She had a
like 2 meter long
she
light
could turn
cord.
the lights on. Yeah, but this presumably this piece of string goes all the way to God, and he just uses the power of some angels to turn the light on for her, because God knows where that's attached to.
So she had a blue theme going on in the mid-70s in her bedroom, didn't she? Sort of blue, light 2
blue,
shades of
yeah.
light blue stripes.
Stripes on
She's
wallpaper.
got a big brown wardrobe there. A couple of twee little lights on the wall with little
Sconces.
doilies, lampshady things. Yeah, but I don't think we saw lots of that. But over the years, we have seen that bedroom owned by different landladies. So obviously in the Rovers fire in '86, we saw Bet getting dragged out there by a fireman and Kevin Webster. Didn't see a whole lot of it then because it was dark and smoky. But we've seen there were quite a few scenes of Jack and Vera living there in the '90s when it was again flowers like rose patterns on the wall.
Kind of Kath Kidston-y look.
Yeah, actually it was a little bit. You're right, and that always had the funny scenes of Vera trying to seduce Jack into bed. By the time Dougie had taken over, it was
Red for danger.
yeah.
And man.
Yeah, red, very very red walls.
Red was the power colour of characters who wanted to be taken seriously in this era, like Carla as well later on would have red and black decoration in her flat.
Of course, famous Rover's bedroom scene was when Edna Miller was found dead in Dougie's bed one night after a particularly heavy night of drinking. And we also saw quite a lot of that room as well during Shelley's abuse storyline when she was basically made into a hermit, wasn't she?
Given agoraphobia.
Yeah, given agoraphobia by Charlie Stubbs, who was...
She became reclusive and she didn't want to leave her bedroom. So
he was coercively
her
controlling her before that term existed. But she had a kind of two-tone bedroom, didn't she? She had a dado rail in the middle with the red in the bottom half and kind of cream, paley yellowy sort of in the top half. I quite like the look of that.
One thing I really enjoy in looking at old set photos is the decoration and how it reflected the taste of the time in kind of a very middle of the road way.
I'm surprised this wasn't all rag roll, to be honest, by the time we got to this period.
Nothing was like super innovative or like cutting edge or trend or super trendy, but it was all very, you know, if you were decorating your house in this time, you probably would have considered this colour scheme at some point. You're decorating.
Yeah, definitely. The weirdest thing about the upstairs in the Rovers is in 2008, they decided to have another living quarters up there.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably dropped out a lot of people's memories. And I'm hoping that some people watching or listening to this now go, oh yeah, that was weird.
Yeah,
and I remember it just appearing and going, where are they?
If you imagine where everybody lives in the Rovers now, you can, in your mind, you probably think, so Jenny and Daisy's front room is the back room of the Rovers, where Jenny watches TV and they sit, and it's like a break room as well. Then they've got their little kitchen. That's the kitchen for the Rovers and also for their private use. Yeah. Then upstairs is probably just a bunch of bedrooms.
Bedrooms and bathroom.
A bathroom and like, you know, the Airbnb or like...
Yeah. I can't imagine that much is going to fit up there. Although when has that ever stopped? There being bedrooms inserted into the Rovers. But here they had this full-on massive living area, didn't they?
It's like a living room, yeah.
3-4 times the size of the back room of the Rovers. And this is when Michelle and Steve were living there.
Well, they were land.
Yeah, they were land people there.
Land people.
And you know, there was a fireplace there. There was a little kitchen area. They'd have a couple of sofas there, little coffee table.
It was like a tiny apartment.
It was a little
upstairs.
And I literally I don't think that we're supposed to think that even exists. I think if anything, this has been retconned out of existence.
Yeah,
it was
I don't
just
think
a little
it exists
experiment.
now.
I don't really see why they even bothered having this, because everything that they did there, surely they could have also done in what's now the back room at the Rovers. But it's just a really interesting snippet of time, a little snapshot, isn't it, of when they tried something else. It's almost like, you know, can you imagine them doing it in the cabin, and Rita's just saying one day, I think I'm just going to pop down the cellar to go and get the newspapers, and then for a few years there's the cabin
It's a
cellar.
giant cavernous cellar.
I mean, we've been told as well in the Rovers these days that the attic's been converted. Do you remember when Simon was living there a few years ago, and they talk about having the attic? Never seen it. Never. I don't think we've seen. And again, I'm probably very, very wrong at this. I don't think we've seen the upstairs of the Rovers since Jenny and Johnny have been there. Whoa, hold up. Wait a minute. Coronation Street, come on. The sooner had we finished recording this episode, making the video and everything, you decide to land upstairs on the Rovers with us for the first time in donkey's years. Thanks, guys. But very nice, classy stuff.
It is a bit, yeah. We've got nice wood panelling. It's painted
carried
white.
on upstairs. It's very fancy. I mean, it's a far cry away from what I imagine the upstairs of the Rovers looks like, and it seems quite vast as well.
Yeah, so it's a lot of space.
Maybe the upstairs room could fit in there after all. I don't know. But
so they've got like a cream patterned wallpaper with a lovely little picture of a chipmunk.
I love the chipmunk in there. Very lovely, isn't it? Yeah, it just carries on the blue and white theme from downstairs, doesn't it? The bathroom, absolutely lovely. It
wasn't nice until it became the scene of a crime.
Yeah, maybe that wasn't so nice. But they've got kind of blue wallpaper there.
Blue wood panelling.
Looks very expensive, really, doesn't it? It looks very, very Jenny. And I think there's definitely, I mean, I wouldn't mind going there for a bit of B&B action myself. Oh, that sounds a bit rude. I mean, I'd like to stay there. It looks very classy. I love it. I hope we get to see it again. But got a feeling that it was maybe not we needed after tonight's episode.
I think the set was built for this storyline.
Think it was. But
maybe there might be a bit of sad reflection in the beautifully illuminated mirror.
Oh yes,
accompanied by a countertop basin.
It was lovely, and a very nice shower as well. A little bit acid stained, but I'm sure it scrubs right off.
Yeah, maybe. Do you think they're gonna have to redecorate again?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. Should we, let's get back to what we were going to be saying now.
Okay.
Back to the past. We did see a little bit more of the upstairs of the Rovers during the second fire in 2013.
Now, just to be clear, there were two
fires. Two fires. We saw Stella in bed and banging on the windows there, but it was dark. You couldn't really tell much. But she'd also, when the fire was first started, she had a little bath as well.
She was having a little girly time, wasn't she?
Yeah,
she had tea lights and things. Little did she know, as she was reclining and enjoying the spa-like atmosphere she had created, that
many years previously,
50 years previously, a seal had been also enjoying a spa day.
And actually, if you compare the pictures of the seal in the bath to Stella in the bath,
it actually seems like it's the same.
Feels like it could be the exact same bathroom. The taps are in different spots, but with the tiling and everything, I can totally imagine that's exactly the same bathroom. So good job whoever designed the Rovers bathroom in 2013 for Stella. Back room of the Rovers now then, Gemma. So this is...
Well, let's talk about the kitchen first, I think, because we mentioned that they had a little kitchen area upstairs. Now, they probably would have liked to have an extra kitchen, because the kitchen that's in the Rovers now is considerably smaller than it ever used to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is...
It's like a galley kitchen, isn't it, now?
Yeah, there's very little there. You occasionally see... This is sort of a set that, if they want to have a kitchen, they have to get it out of storage, I think. But...
I mean, we used to have a galley kitchen, but this is a galley kitchen even smaller than our one, because there's only room for...
there's one counter
on one side.
Window at the end.
Yeah.
Some quite tasteful wooden cabinets there, I'm going to say.
It's kind of nice looking, but you're supposed to believe that they make all the food, including the hot pots in this tiny oven and kitchen area.
Yeah,
daily.
Doesn't really make... It makes sense. I mean, but... by this point, we're already probably in the medical centre, the amount that we've been stretching out the backwards of the Rovers' return. So why not just keep a huge kitchen? But no, they've got a nice little neat kitchen on the edge there. But back in the early 90s, the kitchen was quite vast.
It was more industrial looking, a bit like the one in the bistro.
It was that's a really. It's probably similar size to the one they had in the bistro. They have in the bistro now.
Units and
this was and they would even they'd go in there and you'd see them eating their breakfast in there. Yeah, sometimes
it was utilitarian. It looked like a working kitchen that you might find in like a business or in a hotel or something to cook for customers, whereas the kitchen now looks like a home kitchen that also gets used.
Yeah.
Do you see the difference?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Although,
I don't know if I was explaining it.
What I would say is, if I'm going to lose a massive tarantula in a Rover's kitchen, I'd probably prefer to lose it in the current Rover's kitchen because there's fewer places for it to hide.
Yes, that was the story.
This was the story back in 1992. There's a giant mouse-eating spider that goes on the loose. That's a story for another day. And there's at the same time as the Rover's health inspector comes round, and nobody knows where this spider is. And as Alec is showing the health inspector around, he kind of spots it behind him, and he has to kind of back up to hide it from the view of this health inspector. And then as it's going past him, you see his face as he's crushing this giant spider. And I don't think they could do it these days, but the look on Roy Barraclough's face, Alec Gilroy's face, when they were doing that was just priceless. Right. But yeah, massive kitchen. Now it's a lot more wee. and more in fitting with the space that they've got, I suppose.
But also, back in the day, it was bigger because it kind of made sense because I think they did a lot more catering.
Yes.
Back in there.
Yeah.
So, but they still do. They still cater for people, so they'll do sandwiches and platters and things. Where are they?
I think they're just making them on the. I think when they've done catering before in Corrie, they've just got the tables out in the back room and buttered all the bread there. So the back room of the Rovers, I think this is our final room in the pub now, is the second most important set in my eyes.
Yes.
After the bar itself, and I love. So it's the living space of whoever happens to be the landlord and landlady at the time, and that this has changed. Although the dimensions of it haven't necessarily changed, it's been interesting seeing the decoration changing with the times over the years.
Yeah, I don't think they've made a really big thing about this until Jenny and Johnny took over to sort of when they decorated and made a stamp, and it's very much in Jenny's style, and you got the penguins on the wall and everything. At the beginning of the Rovers, Annie had her domain there, and it was very much, it was kind of masculine to begin with, and then it kind of becomes more feminine as the show progresses. But I just think it's funny that it's never been our thing that when a new landlord and landlady, or individuals of that nature, move into the Rovers, it kind of makes sense to me that they would make their stamp on that room. But I really think that, iconically speaking, Annie and Jenny are the only ones who you can really look at it and go, yes, they decorated that for themselves.
I don't know. Well, let's have a look through them and see what we think. So the dimensions have still always been the same, apart from, like I said earlier, there used to be two doors on the door on the wall where there is now one from the hall, and one of them led into the cellar apparently, and then that just kind of disappeared over time. You still got a sort of window space where the window is now, although looking at some 1961 episodes, it almost looks like you can't see outside of it, and it's almost looks like boarded up, doesn't it? Back in the far corner opposite the door when you went in, there'd be a cupboard, and then you got the fire surround where it still is now. There was a mirror above there, and then occasionally there'd be other little. I think there was another window we saw. I haven't got a picture of this one that looked like it was looking into the kitchen or something at one point, but all very weird. Then over the years, it just kind of. The decoration changed with the time. So in the 70s, once it went into colour, we could see it was just kind of a dirty cream sort of colour, wasn't it? It's all right. Annie Walker's dead. She doesn't mind. She would say it was pearly.
This was tasteful. She had like pearlescent curtains, and she had nice striped wallpaper with a picture rail above, and then a beige decoration, and
again the ceiling seeming to stretch up a lot higher than they had any right to. There was a little bit in the 70s as well where they went for kind of blue highlights as well, didn't they?
This is what you pointed out in the Rovers main bar, where the panelling gets painted in contrasting colours, and that was a trend that happened at a certain point in time that we don't talk about anymore.
Yeah, so the door that led into the back room was mostly white, but with blue
highlights
bits around the panels. Not very pleasant. Then moving into the late 80s, once the fire has happened, you've just got various floral designs. Sort of, it was definitly, I'm going to say, Bet's taste. Although I mean, it's not.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
When I think of Bet,
add that in, yeah.
When I think of Bet, is she going to not make it leopard print themed? I don't know, but it was almost kind of nanny-ish, wasn't it?
Yeah, but think about, this is what, okay, right, so nanny-ish to us means a certain style, because the people that were nannies when we were kids were born in that era, but nanny-ish for people of our time is going to be, at some point, grey plush mirrored coffee tables. Nanny-ish isn't like a static concept.
Okay, so we had our pink, floral, creamy kind of colours in the late 80s into the 90s. There was a big horse picture on the wall.
In the 80s, for fashion, a lot of people don't really look back to this and realise this, but it was all influenced by the 50s. So that was why you had the poofy big skirts and the big bouffanty hair and all that kind of stuff, because they were modelling everything on the...
Well, Better certainly had that one.
Yeah, so this kind of decoration with the chintzy tablecloth and pinks and pastels and stuff, that was also very 50s.
I like...
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I like looking at all the like little knickknacks
trinkets
and things
like giraffes and
and on the Rover's mantelpiece at one point there was a little giraffe and an eagle and stuff, and it's just always fun. There was a big again very 90s looking sofa there in the early 90s, a sort of cream
also
thing.
in this we're just looking at some pictures of Bet and Alec in the back room of the Rovers, and at one point there's a very sick looking house plant in the window which I think must have actually been a real house plant.
Must have
and
been.
I'm fairly sure that there are very, very few real plants in any of the sets in Corrie because they would die immediately because there's no light.
So the floral look kind of kept going until 1999 when it was finally redecorated and made to look a bit more modern, or modern as it was back then, because I think, like we said with Dougie's bedroom earlier in the early 2000s, big bold colours was definitely in back then, and this is when Rover's back room was in its orange phase with the like blue highlights. It was two-tone wallpaper again, so that up to hip height you had orange and blue stripes, and then kind of peachy orange in the top half.
This was more of an artifact of this was 2000, but this was definitely a 90s thing where you'd have because dado rails used to be very popular, and then lots of people got rid of dado rails, but then there was a trend where you'd have like a patterned wallpaper in the bottom half of your wall. Then you'd have this kind of strip that you could buy, which was like a companion colour contrast. Well, it would be like a complementary pattern that would go, and then you'd paint the top half of your wall one of the colours from your base pattern. And I remember this in like changing rooms and stuff, and I think
they were definitely rocking that in the early 2000s.
Yeah, so they've got like a teal and peach going on there. I just love looking back at this. There's so much nostalgia for like how we used to think. And this is another thing. When I look at this stuff and I think, oh god, that's awful. How did we ever think that was nice? Then it gets me paranoid to like modern times. I'm thinking, what are we doing wrong now?
So by 2002, when Fred was in charge of the Rovers there, it had changed again in the back room to a more light grey kind of colour with there was
it's neutral, it's not masculine, it's not feminine.
It was very neutral for a bit. It seemed like the changes came thick and fast in the early 2000s, because that was in 2001 it changed that. By 2004 it was kind of creamy orangey colours with red kind of sort of flower flecks.
Well, this was again another really big trend of this era of like, you know, the 2000s up to 2010 to have a plain wallpaper with a plain background, like, you know, like a beige or a cream or a white, with big, bold, sparse floral designs. Because we've seen, like, even in our house, we've got like a bit of wallpaper that's like that from then. And then when we were looking at houses a couple of years ago, there's definitely quite a few of them that have the accent wall, which is just like a big floral pattern. I my favourite bit of the era was my memory is that picture of Vernon and Liz in their cowboy outfits that went above the mantelpiece with his cheesy white teeth, because that covered like they had like an Egyptian Queen Nefertiti picture there before that, didn't they? I quite like this. Is one of my favourite back room of the Rovers sort of decors, I would say. But then after that... Hang on. I just like the fact that Vernon invented the Instagram filter before it existed.
His white teeth, like it. Then we had sort of a grey and with red highlights for a little bit, which was in 2013 it changed.
Whose was this?
This was Stella. I think this was. I don't remember this must have been after the Rovers fire. They changed this, and the wall where the fire surround is now was just plain block red with like poppy patterns.
This was
above.
your accent wall.
Yeah, and everything else was grey with
like
more kind of reedy,
tree.
grassy, tree sort of patterns on. A nice, tasteful white panel door leading into the kitchen. You had your grey sofa. You had your quite fancy, puffy grey chairs round the table.
This is like a bold colours contrasting with one another. And it's a bit more subtle now, I think, decorating trends.
And that stayed like that up until when Jenny and Johnny moved in, because we had like even beginning of Jenny and Johnny we must have had this, because we've got a picture here of Henry and Gemma doing their cocktails and their Uber-Dubers and everything, and that we've still got the grey going on there. But then it was finally into our modern Rovers look, which is... I absolutely love how the back of the Rovers looks now.
See, this is kind of made up to make it look like it's always been this way, because you've got the panelling, the wooden
panelling's back again now,
up to hip height, and it is very, very elaborate and
kind of a light brown sort of wood.
It's like an oaky wood colour, and then you've got a sort of light navy on the wall, and then the accent on the chimney is a geometric navy pattern on a white background.
Yeah,
and it does look like it's and a herringbone wooden floor and a massive, very expensive in the show,
marble
but very
table.
Cheap in real life.
We've seen
marble
this.
Table.
We've seen this marble table in real life.
It
doesn't look as good.
This looks like you couldn't move it by yourself, but in real life you could probably push it with your finger.
Yeah. I love all the pictures they put on the wall. Like they had the J Heart J, didn't they? They had the penguins and everything. It was very kind of family feeling. There was a picture of Johnny and Kate and Aidan on the wall as well for a time.
Yeah.
It was really lovely. I think that this is just right. But I'm hoping the thing that we always complain about the street, or maybe it's mostly me, is the external bit of the street. They're so loath to change, aren't they? There's a look about how the main street should look, and Audrey's looks like this, and the factory looks... I suppose the factory and Audrey's has changed slightly, but...
Well, the fact that they've never changed the yellow and blue painted bricks...
Yeah, from Jack
for
and
where
Vera.
Jack and Vera lived there is testament to how reticent they are
They
to
like the outdoor set of Coronation Street to stay frozen in time, but as we've seen from all this Rovers stuff... They're happy to change that, fairly regularly, more regularly than we ever redecorate.
What are you moaning about?
I'm not. I'm saying it's great. I'm saying that's
one of the things you always say.
I'm just saying it's.
Okay.
I moan about the fact that they don't change the outdoors.
Oh, okay.
Like they've got to keep the factory. There's got to be a salon.
As long as we change the interiors.
Yeah.
And I was wrong then when I said that there are only really two big areas of decorating with the landladies making their mark. But I would say that they are quite distinctive. Jenny's period and
Annie's period.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe
it's just because they're both strong women, and it feels like even though there is a future of Coronation Street, it does feel like a bookend, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's nice to look back on the history of the Rovers and all the women who have stalked the hallways.
Yeah, and how they've made their mark.
But what about the back garden?
Yeah, I mean,
there's
only so much that you can say about the yard. We'll have it for completion purposes, but it's not changed too much. I mean, back in the 70s, that episode where the Yobbos broke into the Rovers and into Annie's bedroom, there was a scene at the end of that where they're chased out the back, and I think Len and Ray kind of accost them. So we saw a bit of the back of the Rovers yard.
Are we going to say that the yard is the most consistent space in Rovers history?
Yeah, it probably is, to be honest. It looks like there was a little lean-to or something in the yard at that point where the smoking shelter is now. But yeah, it's all just, the same old white brick. The smoking shelter was put there in 2008, I think we said, and they don't have people going out the back too often there, do they? But I've got a little picture here. This must have been from last year. Look, Brian coming out of the door that leads from the bar to the Rovers, because you got the door that leads to the hallway where the coats are hanging up, and then you got this door which leads to the back of the bar where the piano is and the old snack bar and everything used to be. So that's how they get out there. But I'm not a massive fan of the back of the Rovers. It does the job.
So can you explain to me?
It does give us an idea of how many rooms there are upstairs, though, because there's an awful lot of windows.
Yeah, there are.
I still don't think that huge lounge space could fit there. I don't know.
So there's a window in the backyard, and that presumably that attaches to the kitchen, but that doesn't exist in the kitchen because that's where the oven is.
I'm trying to figure it out. We're looking at a back of the Rovers now, and I'm thinking, is this the lounge?
When people walk through the Rovers door, they're in the main bar. They go, right, I'm going to go out in the back and have a cigarette. They walk through the doorway.
Yeah.
Where do they go?
What, the main doorway? They go straight on.
Have we ever seen this hallway?
I don't know. I don't think there.
Is it just a passageway that exists?
I think there's just a door.
Is it just a passageway that exists between this and Ken's house?
I don't know.
They don't walk through the back room.
I don't think we're supposed to think about it. I don't think we're supposed to think about it too hard. But just looking at a picture here, I think we've got the Rovers, the living room window, the door outside of the corridor, the kitchen. So I don't know what this bit to the side. None of it really makes sense. But let's not think about it too hard, shall we? Because it might just make our brains explode.
Well, we made a mention about the room of requirement earlier, and I think it is maybe. Are we going to say to bring this to a close? Have you got anything else to say?
No, not particularly.
I'm going to say that in the grand tradition of British fiction, making things up and having more space than they really need, like J.K. Rowling's Room of Requirement, like Doctor Who's TARDIS, where it's as big or as small as you ever want it to be. The Rovers exist in a magical space where there is no geography or restraints for space. You can just do whatever you like because it's not really real.
Exactly. We were talking to the Coropedia guys recently about this, and David said that the actual street itself, the outside of the street, wasn't seen in the first year of the programme at all. And so that's why the Rovers set designers felt that they could make the Rovers interior whatever size they wanted to, because they didn't have a real sort of lockdown idea about this is the dimensions of it. And when we finally saw the Rovers full exterior in 1962, they could only make it as big as the studio would allow, and that was what they were stuck with, even though they'd maybe said, well, this is what we want it to look like. And then when they tried to actually build it, it was like, no, can't do it. So, well,
this is the whole thing.
It's the history, magic, telemagic.
The history of Coronation Street's stories are always a negotiation between the production possibilities and what the writers can imagine, and that's just life. It's a compromise always, and even though it has been confusing, hopefully you've enjoyed the history of the Rovers. Thank you. Michael spent so much time putting this together.
Well, this has been like a little project of mine over the past few months. I'm thinking, I need to find the right time to do this, and I need to make a video of it and everything. I don't know whether listening back, whether it's, I don't know how well it's going to work as an audio only podcast.
Do you feel like you know the Rovers more now, or do you feel like it's just an elusive?
I think I pretty much understood it beforehand, apart from the incomprehensible bits, like the extra door that they had in 61 and the massive upstairs room. I'd love to see more of the extra rooms. Although does it if they had the cellar more often, if they had the upstairs more often, would it make it feel less special?
Good question.
I want to see the renovated attic. That's the thing with the Rovers. It's supposed to be a proper B&B now, isn't it? That they let out rooms, which they've only ever done just recently.
Well, they've only ever really let it to characters that are already on the street. I want to see them have a guest.
Yeah, they could do, couldn't they? Well, Ronnie lived there for a bit, and that Scott bloke who Johnny. Johnny but you know what I mean. They're like characters, and then they stay there. Yeah. Oh well, maybe that's a storyline for the future. Who knows? I think that's it. I think we're done.
Thank you very much, Michael, for all your hard work. Thank you to Coropedia.
Thank you for joining me today.
And all the reference books that you used, which include the book we mentioned by
Life
by
and
Darren
Times at the Rovers Return by Darren Little. They also had another Rovers book recently, didn't they? You're thinking, the Tim Randall book.
By Tim Randall. Yeah. And there's also the 60th anniversary book too.
There's loads of great books about it, but I mean, as always, Coropedia.
You don't need those
and Google
because
image
you've got
search
our
has been
podcast.
helpful for today. Yeah. I hope this is entertaining for you. If you want to see more things like this, let us know. I don't think that any other place in Coronation Street will have changed quite as much as the Rovers, but
maybe the factory. But I think there's definitely a real charm and love and nostalgia for the Rovers. It is the most special place in Coronation Street, and I think that is in good hands with our current landlady,
Totally agree
Jenny,
with that one.
And Daisy. What a star she is. It really feels as though the future's bright for the Rovers, and who knows what rooms will be invented in the future.
Who knows? Who knows? They will probably find the conservatory one of these days,
Yes.
or the movie room, the cinema room.
Yeah, there's
it's
a
always
screening
been
room.
there, everybody.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. We appreciate you, and
See you next time.
see you next time.
Bye.